Any massive operationally significant offensive to seize the Donbas will be delayed until late 2026 or early 2027, if it happens at all. Putin will continue to get weaker as Ukraine doesn't just hold on, but improves its ability to attack at the operational level. The need to fund a near 40% military budget means his options are shrinking. It has been a remarkable year on the global stage of war. Ukraine, the epicenter of Europe's largest conflict since World War II. Vladimir Putin continues to wage his 10-day special military operation against Ukraine. Innovation and bravery from Ukraine has kept them defying the odds over and over again. But as we look ahead, what can we expect to see in 2026? Is the Ukraine war sustainable? Where are the next tipping points that can decide the winner? And what terrifying new weapons and strategies are emerging? I'm Philip Ingram, and this is Battle Plans Exposed. So looking at Ukraine, the key question is, will the Donbas fall? Putin has long demanded Ukraine hand over the whole of the Donbas region in exchange for peace. Made up of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, it is the economic heart of Ukraine, thanks to its natural resources, and it acts as a defensive buffer. A final push to capture the Donbas would solidify Russia's objective of carving out a land bridge all the way from Crimea to Russia, cutting off Ukrainian access to the Sea of Azov. As we've discussed before in previous episodes, it's the gateway to Kyiv. The battle for the remaining Ukrainian-held territory in the Donetsk Oblast, particularly the fortified defensive line anchored by the cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk in this region, remains a major Russian strategic objective. Any significant Russian breakthrough here would be viewed as a major operational success. These cities serve as crucial logistical hubs and a robust defensive barrier, preventing Russian forces from pushing further west into central Ukraine. The Ukrainian defensive lines aren't as numerous or as heavily fortified as you push further out from the Donbas. So considering all of this, from a Ukrainian perspective, this is an absolute no-no. Losing Donbas will almost certainly guarantee the loss of Kyiv and therefore the loss of Ukraine to Putin. Over the past 3 years and 8 months, Russia has seized 23% of the Donetsk region, while 22.6% remains under Ukrainian control. What I think will happen is that we will continue to see a stalemate on the front line. Russia may advance a few 5 or 10 kilometers. Pokrovsk, as we've talked about beforehand, will likely fall into Russian hands. But as we've seen elsewhere in the front line, the Ukrainians will make advancements because Ukraine is using that front line to fix the Russians, to fix them tactically. And it's happy to trade space at this grindingly slow rate for time. And that time it's using to attack Russia at an operational level, attack its oil fields, attack its defense manufacturing capability, attack it politically, attack its strategic bombers, attack its grey fleet vessels that are going around the world, attack the Black Sea fleet and confine that to port. Well, Russia will continue to grind forward at a devastating cost, as we've seen with the slow gains around Pokrovsk. The total collapse of the Donbas, the fortress belt of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, is highly unlikely in 2026 unless the West's ammunition supplies and intelligence sharing falls off a cliff. Russia's pace of advance and the high casualties per square kilometre, despite their manpower pool, simply do not support a major operational breakthrough. Russia cannot create a concentration of force able to punch through anywhere. And we have to remember UK Defence Intelligence estimates it would take Russia 4 years and 2 million more casualties at the current rates of advance to capture the territory. Any massive operationally significant offensive to seize the Donbas will be delayed until late 2026 or early 2027, if it happens at all. We'll know if this prediction is wrong only if we see a clear measurable spike in our indicators and warnings. Specifically, a tripling of railway deliveries of heavy armour and the deployment of up to 3 fresh combat-ready reserve corps to the immediate staging areas near the front. Until then, it remains a bloody attritional slog. Ukraine will continue to view the Donbas as a matter of national existence, and will devote a huge share of its manpower and newly arriving Western technology to holding that fortified defensive line. Losing it is not just a military defeat, it is a political surrender. Therefore, while we expect Russia to escalate its strikes on logistical targets behind the lines, a key indicator, I expect Kyiv to successfully manage this defence through 2026, forcing the conflict to look elsewhere for a breakthrough. But it's not just the Donbas that will be a huge point of contention in 2026. We also need to pay close attention to another flashpoint in Ukraine, Crimea. The Black Sea and Crimea. It's not just the Black Sea and Crimea anymore. We're seeing a new terrifying trend, Ukraine taking the fight globally. Kyiv has shifted its strategy from the battlefield to the maritime shadow war. Russia's shadow fleet tankers using shell companies and flags to avoid sanctions is now a target. We've seen surgical strikes far from the Black Sea in the Mediterranean, the Baltic, and even the Indian Ocean. These attacks, likely using advanced naval drones, target critical systems like propulsion shafts and engine rooms. On top of this, Ukraine's use of long-range missiles and naval drones has severely degraded Russia's Black Sea fleet and targeted Russian infrastructure in the occupied Crimea and across in Russia itself. The continued use of these weapons to isolate and eventually threaten the deoccupation of Crimea is a major flashpoint. The fight for control over the Black Sea grain corridor and global maritime trade will also remain critical. So looking ahead, what I think is Ukraine will continue its slow but successful process of isolating Crimea from the sea. By the end of 2026, the cumulative toll of naval drone and missile strikes, backed by targeting data from its Western partners, will make the remaining Black Sea fleet units essentially non-operational and force Russia to pull the bulk of its major assets further east. It's already pulled the majority from Crimea to Russia itself and pull them completely out of the basin, functionally deblockading the Ukrainian grain corridor on Kyiv's terms. And that grain corridor is from Odessa out through the Black Sea and to the rest of the world. The maritime shadow war against the oil trade is only just beginning. As Kyiv increases pressure on the shadow fleet, targeting vessels further afield, Russia will inevitably respond by escalating its own grey zone campaign. We will see the rate of unexplained sabotage incidents. Our second key warning sign, targeting of European underwater data cables and energy interconnectors, spike dramatically, turning the entire North Atlantic into a new undeclared front. The successful maritime isolation of Crimea will continue severely degrading Russian naval capability and making Kyiv the de facto security guarantor of its own Black Sea grain corridor. However, this success comes with a price. Putin will not accept the economic damage and will retaliate by greenlighting further grey zone escalation outside the conflict zone. Therefore, the most terrifying flashpoint in the next year won't be in the Black Sea itself, but on the pipelines and cables of the North Atlantic and the Baltics as Russia seeks to punish Ukraine's Western supporters. Now let's look at the operational level and predict what will happen over the next 12 months. Over the past year, beneath the surface, the Russian economy has been buckling under sanctions and war strain. Sanctions imposed physically by the Ukrainians against Russian oil and manufacturing infrastructure. This financial pressure is generating internal stress politically. How close is Russia to a collapse? That's the key question. Taking all of this on board, this puts the idea of a Russian expansion of the front line really in doubt. There is a persistent concern that Russia could intensify efforts to open a new front or a buffer zone along the northern border, especially targeting areas such as Sumy or Kharkiv. This would obviously require Ukraine to bolster up defences in the region, weakening the defensive capabilities in the Donbas. However, I'm not sure that this will happen. What I think is Russia is militarily incapable of sustaining an operational level expansion into a new front in Sumy or Kharkiv, certainly in 2026. The economic strain, while not yet producing a full collapse, is already forcing Moscow to concentrate its resources on the single highest priority objective, the seizing of the rest of Donetsk. Therefore, the threat to the north will remain a diversionary feint and an information warfare tool used to force Ukraine to expend resources, but not a genuine invasion risk, because simply Russia doesn't have the reliable massed maneuver capable reserve divisions, corps or formations required to hold the Donbas and open a new 200-mile front. While Putin desperately wants a strategic victory like seizing a major city like Kharkiv, the persistent economic overheating and the need to fund a near 40% military budget means his options are shrinking. Russia can afford to continue the attritional grinding in the Donbas, but cannot afford the massive initial material and personnel losses that a new, large-scale, multi-axis offensive would demand. Russia will therefore only use long-range missiles and drone strikes in the north to tie down Ukrainian forces, but it will not commit ground troops or the necessary ground troops needed to break through. The Kremlin knows that a new large-scale offensive requires another round of forced mobilisation, and that is where its political collapse risk lies. The greatest spike in political dissent we've seen so far has followed every mass conscription drive. Putin's entire 2026 budget is designed for a long, controlled war, not a massive, high-risk surge. Therefore, they will stick to the Donbas objective and avoid the high-casualty gamble of a new front near Sumy, which would necessitate mass mobilization and risk shattering the learned indifference of the Russian public. In addition, Putin just doesn't have the training capacity or experienced leaders to put together any sizable force. And Putin will continue to get weaker as Ukraine doesn't just hold on, but improves its ability to attack at the operational level with its indigenous ballistic missiles, improved technology, and watch out for more attacks like Operation Spider's Web, delivering more humiliation to Putin. So unfortunately, the war will continue. So you can join me in 2026 as we analyse the next chapter and flashpoints of the Ukraine war. So please hit subscribe, like the video, and let us know what topics you'd like us to cover next. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.